Hello, I'm Martine Croxall. This is the Iran War Today, bringing you up to date with all you need to know about the US-Israel war with Iran. Let's start with some of today's key developments. It's now 6 months since the US and Israel launched the first military strikes on their war on Iran in February 2026. Tehran remains defiant as Washington turns its focus to economic pressure rather than military power. In the US, Donald Trump says he is in no hurry to end the conflict, despite initially saying it would last for only a few weeks. Economies around the world face further uncertainty, with the vital Strait of Hormuz still closed and the US and Iran showing no signs of returning to the negotiating table. So, it's been 6 months since the United States and Israel attacked Iran, beginning a conflict that shows no signs of coming to an end.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
6 months on, what has he achieved? Let's break it down.
This terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon.
Well, that line wasn't new then, and it's not new now. In fact, President Trump has said that, along with Israel, they had obliterated Iran's nuclear program the year before. But 6 months on, Iran's leaders are defiant, and those nuclear negotiations are nowhere to be seen.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
That, of course, was a clear call for regime change. Now, the US-Israeli strikes killed the then supreme leader and dozens of military and political figures in Iran, but it didn't dislodge the regime. For now, the hardliners within it seem to have the edge.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
It's true that Iran has suffered considerable losses, but it still has a lot of capacity to fight. And key to that has been its use of insurgency tactics to control the Strait of Hormuz. Now, President Trump never actually mentioned the Strait of Hormuz at the start of the war, but it's been Iran's control of the strait that's defined his inability to end it. Oh yes, and then there's this.
All I have to do is leave Iran, and we'll be doing that very soon.
But 6 months on, they're still there.
Tom Bateman there with some analysis of the last 6 months. Well, Donald Trump says he's not in a hurry to end the war with Iran as the US pivots its focus to economic pressure tactics. In March, the president called the war a short-term excursion, but months later he now says it will continue for as long as is necessary. The war has cost the US tens of billions of dollars already. It's pushed up prices, depleted missile stocks and damaged Donald Trump's popularity ahead of the midterm elections. I speak to Daniel Bush, who's in Washington. How is this war now being seen across the US, Daniel? Where does Washington go from here?
Well, in terms of the public perception of this war, polls show, and they have shown this now for several months, that a majority of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of this conflict, perhaps even of going to war to begin with, some polls have shown. And that's true of a majority of Americans and some independent voters and even some Republicans, some members of Trump's own party. So broadly speaking, there has been disapproval of this conflict from the beginning, in large part because President Trump began his second term promising not to entangle the U.S. in more foreign conflicts, to pull back from the world stage, to reduce America's military footprint, and instead started a war that now at the 6-month mark shows no end in sight. I think also it's fair to say that the public has been somewhat confused about President Trump's messaging around this conflict. The president himself has argued that his message is very clear, that Iran should abandon its nuclear weapons, give up its ballistic missile program, and its support for proxy groups in the area. Those are his three stated goals. But he has not explained to the American people why it is that the U.S. has failed, or how it can be that the U.S. has failed to achieve those objectives months in. And then, of course, there's also the economic pain that Americans have been feeling. Gas prices have been high for months. It's an issue that is deeply worrying to Republicans who are in danger of losing control of the House, perhaps also the Senate, although that's a little bit more of a long shot. So where does the president go from here? He has said repeatedly that he is not in a hurry to end this war. He has shifted to more of an economic stranglehold strategy as opposed to a military one with the Strait of Hormuz. But Republicans are in more of a hurry. They want to focus more squarely on the president's domestic agenda agenda, on their own economic ideas. So there's a major disconnect between the White House and Republicans ahead of these midterms, and President Trump has not signaled that he plans to wind this down anytime soon. Tehran, of course, has not bended to the will of Washington, has not bowed to the pressure to fully reopen the strait or even come back to the negotiating table. So right now, this is a bit of a stalemate with no clear picture as to how the U.S. can wind this conflict down in the coming months.
Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel Bush. Well, Iran remains defiant in the face of ongoing threats from America and despite the impacts of the war. Thousands of people were killed in the military action, many of them civilians. Iran's leadership was also hit hard, including the killing of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. But Tehran has promised to defy US sanctions and continues to claim key leverage and control, of course, over the vital Strait of Hormuz. Bahman Kalbasi from BBC Persian joins us now. That's our Persian language service. Bahman, how has Iran been affected by the last 6 months of conflict? I mean, does Tehran think it can win this war?
Iran, if we look at the people of the country, has paid an enormous price in both lives, a destruction of infrastructure, as well as economic impact that is showing itself in 80% inflation, in some cases 120% increase in food prices, a loss of jobs, a massive transfer of millions of people from brink of poverty into poverty. It is a dire situation for the Iranian people. For the Iranian government, it's a different story. They are defiant and they are not changing their position or softening where they stand vis-a-vis United States. And they feel that they have now leverage that they didn't have before the war, namely the Strait of Hormuz, but also demonstrating the ability to inflict serious damage to America's standing in the region, as well as its infrastructure, military and otherwise. So these are two different stories. And as far as victory is concerned, clearly the Iranian government feels that the fact that they've survived the war that promised to bring them down or bring them to their knees is a victory. But for the Iranian people who are paying the price of this, stuck between a government that is oppressing them and a foreign power that is bombing them and destroying their infrastructure, they seem to be the biggest losers of them all.
Bahman, for the moment, thank you very much, Bahman Kalbasi from BBC Persian. Well, the war began with joint strikes by the United States and Israel and military action against Iran that Benjamin Netanyahu had called for. Across the Middle East, countries are feeling the fallout, not just in Israel, but also Gulf nations who've been pulled into the conflict. Katie Watson has more from Jerusalem.
6 months on and Iran's regime hasn't been toppled, anything but. In fact, a recent poll here in Israel showed that a whopping 92% of people believe that Iran has emerged the winner in this war. Now, that makes Israel feel vulnerable. It also makes Israel feel fearful. What happened back in October 2023 when Hamas attacked Israel has been deeply traumatic for people here, and the subsequent destruction of Gaza, the military operations in Lebanon, and now this war in Iran has not just been deadly. There have been Israeli casualties, but it's also been costly. Economic shockwaves, the increase in the price of oil, that's had an impact here too. But it also could come at a political cost. There are elections here in October, and Benjamin Netanyahu started this war. It's not over, and he could be punished in the polls as a result. You've also got to consider the relationship that Israel has with the US. The US is Israel's closest ally, but in the last few years there's been an increasingly negative attitude towards Israel, skepticism about US involvement in foreign wars. Trump might be mindful of that as he heads towards midterms in November. Now, elsewhere in the region, in the Gulf has always been considered a place of stability, not being drawn into the conflict seen elsewhere in the Middle East. But all that changed when the war with Iran started. With US bases in several parts of the Gulf, they then became targets. So the reality in the Middle East is very different from what it was.
Katie Watson in Jerusalem. Well, the war in Iran sent shockwaves through the global economy, with very few sectors not affected by the conflict. At the centre of that is the Strait of Hormuz, that vital waterway which previously carried around a fifth of all the world's oil and natural gas. It's been effectively closed for months, with Iran and the US claiming control of it, which sits between Iran and Oman. And with us now is our business correspondent, Mark Ashdown. Mark, 6 months on, what impact in its entirety has this had, and where might it go from here?
Well, I think we've been through phases. We had that initial shock you talked about there that took the markets by surprise. We saw oil spike from $65 a barrel to $120 a barrel. But the expectation even then was this could be over very quickly, buoyed, of course, by Donald Trump's confidence. I think he was saying it was going to be a short, sharp campaign. So things kind of settled down there. There was talk of peace. Then there was a ceasefire. Prices dropped sharply as well. Then I think as it became apparent that was easier said than done, we've settled in now into this phase of elevated prices, but not quite the spikes we saw at the start. And this has affected everything really. The cost of energy for our homes and for businesses, fuel at the pumps, jet fuel for airlines, fertiliser for farming, food prices. So inflation has gone up, and there's very few corners of the world that haven't been affected by this. You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz there. That is still key here. Remember, we had a virtual standstill at the start of all this. 20% of the world's oil and gas transits through there every day. So that disruption to maritime traffic really did impact all that stuff I just spoke about. Where now? Well, technically it is open, but depending on whose terms. Americans want it their way, Iran their way. The Gulf states have ramped up production. That's good news. But we have learned here things can turn very, very quickly. One social media post, one loose word from either side, and things could escalate. I think the takeaway is this is going to have a very long economic tail. There will be some pain, whatever. Eventually, if there is some kind of ceasefire, some kind of truce agreed, the economic fallout will continue for many, many months.
Mark, thank you. Mark Ashdown. So 6 months into this conflict, there are no signs of it coming to an end anytime soon. Let's take a look at the big picture with our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Where do you think we stand now, Frank?
I'm going to call it what it is, an unmitigated disaster for Donald Trump, for US military power, for CENTCOM, for the Iranian people, for the Gulf Arab states, for the global economy, for the international shipping industry, for the mariners, the thousands of mariners whose lives have been ruined by this. The only people who have done well out of this, albeit at huge cost, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, who now hold the upper hand in Iran. They've come out of this pretty well because they have been able to weaponize geography. They've realized that the geography of this part of the Middle East is on their side. And it's all very well the US assembling this massive naval armada and all of this air power. The US can win every tactical battle. It can take out every target it wants. And yet, if it cannot decapitate the regime as it's expected to do, then that is a failure. And it has blunted, Iran has been able to blunt US military power. And the net result of all of this now, 6 months on, is that at least 12 of America's bases around the region have been severely damaged. Some of them, in the case of, for example, Camp Arif Jan in Kuwait, has suffered up to $1 billion of damage. Iran hit them very early on in the war with precise targeting. And we've been sold a pup right throughout this war. The nonsense that has come out of Washington in terms of we're winning, it's almost finished, Iran's begging for this, begging for that. No, they're not. They're sitting pretty strong because, as I say, they've got geography on their side. They have suffered conventional losses, there's no question about it. They've lost their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and goodness knows what state his son is in, if he's even alive, Mujtaba al-Khamenei. But Iran has come out of this, at least the Revolutionary Guards have come out of this strong, and America has come out of it weaker. And look at the damage to the global economy.
Who can win and how?
Well, I don't think we should see this in terms of winning and losing. I mean, it depends how you wanted to sort of boil that down. But Iran certainly considers that they've won because they've had the most powerful air forces in the world, Israel and United States, throwing everything they've got, short of nuclear weapons, at them. Thousands upon thousands of airstrikes with pinpoint accuracy in most cases. let's not forget the disaster of the Minab Girls' School, where over 100 civilian school children were killed. But despite all of that, they have survived, and their regime needs to survive in order to say they've won. Let's go back to what one of your previous interviewees was saying. You know, the original aims of this war was to essentially decapitate Iran, or so weaken Iran's leadership that they comply with all of Donald Trump's demands, or all of America's demands, when it comes to getting back to the nuclear talks, reducing Iran's ballistic missile program, stopping or at least reducing its support for its proxies in the Middle East, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza. None of this has happened. And nobody's talking about the nuclear file. It's all about the Strait of Hormuz. And let's not forget that on the 27th of February, all traffic was passing perfectly normally, unhindered, through what was functioning as a perfectly normal international waterway, the Strait of Hormuz. This is a problem that Israel and the United States have created, primarily the United States, has created for themselves here. It's the third Gulf War that I have lived through and sort of been in the Gulf for. And it's been far more damaging to the Gulf Arab states than either of the other two in 1991 and 2003, because Iran has, for the first time, absolutely hammered the petrochemical industries and the infrastructure of those Gulf Arab states. And they are now questioning whether it's an asset or a liability being friends of the United States strategically.
Frank, thank you very much. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. Whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or television, thank you for your time. We'll be back soon with another Iran War Today.